This week is part 2 of that awesome conversation with Noah Althoff. We get into theology, worldview, all kinds of interesting stuff. Check it out.
You mentioned reading as something creative.
Yeah.
And definitely writing is something that's creative, and that's one of the spaces that I kind of exist in. Although I can't write anything to music unless it's already an already made up song.
Sure,
so my daughter and I, that's one of our favorite pastimes is to kind of make up all kinds of songs with the tunes of like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is a solid one, but usually they have the word poop or fart in them somewhere.
Obviously, most of my songs still do too.
and so, but like that writing and that reading space, I know you read a lot.
Yeah.
Especially like you read a lot of old dead guys. What is something that you're reading lately that's been just like eye opening for you? That has really maybe changed the way you think, or I should read, or maybe our young adult readers should check out, or even if you just you want to share that with them, even if they're never going to pick up a book. What is that? What is that thing?
Man. So I'm both blessed and cursed with this thing called ADHD, which makes it impossible for me to read one book at a time. So I think I've got a stack of books beside my bed right now. It's probably 6 or 7 of them that I've started reading, and there's probably another stack of 6 or 7 that I will probably start reading before I finish any of those.
I can definitely relate to that. It's not quite that bad for me, but I'm at about 3 or 4.
Okay.
And so they just constantly come in my backpack.
They just kind of cycle in and out.
Yeah, and I mean you feel in a different mood, so you pick up a different read every time. So
but so there's 2 books right now that I'm reading that I'm just really, really loving. One of them is On Christian Liberty by Martin Luther. Definitely one of those old dead guys. And that's one of his shorter works. Would you call that a treatise? There's a T word there for like a old dead guy's tiny little books.
My creative juices do not lend itself to the old words.
But that's been just a really interesting read. I've been getting really into church history lately and just studying the process of how do we get to where we are today? Where did that come from? How did our theology and our ideologies develop through our culture? How does that go back to what we see in the New Testament and the depiction of what's going on there? And that's been just a really interesting read. I think spiritually the best thing for me out of that has just been the reminder of the necessity of faith and how often we strive to work towards our own merits rather than looking to grace as the final authority in our lives. And that's been just a really encouraging read because of that. It's been interesting to see sort of Luther's thought process in the Reformation, and that's something I get pretty nerdy about. So I've been enjoying that. Yeah, well, just like how our doctrines have shifted and why. And I'm a pretty big fan of Eastern Orthodox theology too, and they take kind of a different approach because they had sort of their own Reformation or split from the Catholic Church about 500 years before the Reformation, and a couple other splits. And I'm just really fascinated by those differences. But reading that, I'm reading this book called The Crucifixion of the Warrior God by Greg Boyd, who's this Anabaptist pastor. It's huge. It's like 2 volumes. It's probably, one of the longest books I've ever read in my life. But it's really, really fascinating. It's been really formulative for my faith, I think, in a lot of ways. Because it's. Are you familiar with Greg Boyd at all?
I am. I've seen him in a video study. He went rock climbing with somebody.
Okay.
It was a Bob Goff series.
Yeah.
And then I've read his Letters to a Skeptic. Or Letters from a Skeptic. I can't remember which one that is. And then I just recently took my one of the core courses in the BIC denomination where I had to read The Myth of a Christian Nation. And The Myth of a Christian Nation is probably one of the best books that I've read in quite some time.
Yeah.
Just this idea of the kingdom under mindset or excuse me, power under So basically, you're operating underneath of your strength, and whereas you're not forcing things to happen. You're allowing God to work through you. And he kind of talks about these two different kingdoms. He talks about the kingdom of God and then the kingdom of the world. And really, man, if you look at the state of our country, of our world, really, a lot of people, Christian included, are putting a lot of faith and trust into our governmental systems, right or wrong. That comes from a kingdom of the world.
Sure.
And I think if we were all being honest with ourselves, none of these parties line up with, who Jesus says he was. And, man, it's just like, let's take a step back and to really evaluate things on what Jesus would have done, because, two of his closest disciples were, one was a religious zealot, and then the other one would have been just on the opposite side of the fence. And I'm sure that these guys had conversations, but they're not recorded in the Gospels.
Yeah.
And man, that should tell us something, because it's those things. Those constructs are going to be there.
Yeah.
But man, God is so much more powerful, and it's not up to us to get involved or to be so invested in those things, when we could be so invested in people's lives and in people's eternities, really. So awesome. It was really encouraging read to hear that. And I'm somebody that comes from outside. I don't know your background with the BIC, but I'm somebody that has come into this BIC church from outside. I had never heard of Brethren in Christ, anything like that.
Me too.
Before I got here. And so this whole idea of pacifism was a new thing to me.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody that served in the military.
Sure.
And so it's definitely a challenge for me to get into some of those thought processes and conversations. I just remember in that class, Dr. Terry Brensinger, he shared, I can't remember where they went, but he went on, I think it was in Africa somewhere, and they stayed at a missionary's house. It was like he and his wife were, I think they were getting away for a couple days.
Yeah.
And there was just this gang of robbers come to the door in the middle of the night. He heard them, and he goes downstairs and he opens the door for them, lets them in, asks them if they need anything to drink or eat. And man, just the ability to share that story, like thinking in my own life, would I be able to do that?
Sure, yeah.
My kids, my wife are upstairs,
Right.
Am I going to be able to trust in God that much? And it's really just super challenging. But it was this whole idea of kind of letting go of that. As followers of Jesus, we don't have a whole lot of rights, at least in this earthly kingdom.
You called the lamb down too.
Right. So give him up. And man, that's exactly what he did in that story. And I was just challenged by that, because I'm not so sure that I would have reacted anything close to that.
Gosh,
so
me too. That was a huge, because I didn't grow up in the BIC church either. And I started coming here probably 3 years ago now, something like that. And that was hugely challenging for me when I got here, just because I had never really been exposed to that. And then as soon as I really got into the theology of it, I was surprised that I hadn't been more exposed to it in previous experiences with other churches. And I know a lot of people in my life now that fall on really diverse sides of that question of peacemaking and pacifism and what that looks like practically. And I've come to a position that's probably pretty similar to the BICs at this point, but I think that the conversation of it is just so incredibly important, because I think it's an issue that growing up we just avoided so much in the church. Is that question of like how far, we asked it in other ways, but when it came down to our personal rights, it was very rare that we asked the question of how much are we willing to lay down for the sake of Christ, and for the intrinsic value that we place on others, that we place above our own possessions, our own desire for security and these things. And it's really, really tough, but it's just so important to talk about.
I really, Noah, to be honest, I really don't like that word pacifism.
Yeah.
Because that kind of implies that we're not doing anything about it. But in that story that
like
Dr. Brensinger
passivity,
shared,
we almost take
almost like the word you use, like peacekeeping or peacemaking, because it's almost like the absolute opposite response in that moment. It's like, well, instead of fighting these guys, instead of, running upstairs to get whatever I have to defend myself, I'm going to let them in, and I'm going to let them know that they're cared for.
Right.
Like I'm going to share the gospel with them the whole time they're robbing me.
Yeah. It's not just not repaying evil with evil, but then it's repaying it with good.
Right.
It's taking it to another step.
And it's so difficult, and it's something that we're, especially as, Americans who enjoy a ton of freedoms.
Sure.
That we are very, very susceptible to, because we have all of these rights, and but we're called to give them up. So that's really encouraging. No, what to switch directions a little bit.
Sure.
What would you say to a young person? Maybe they're in early on in high school. Maybe they're getting ready to head to college. They're like being pushed in 1,000 different directions by 1,000 different people. Maybe they're saying, some people are telling them, just go to business school because you can get a job doing anything in that. But that's not what they get. That doesn't get them out of bed in the morning. What would you say to somebody, kind of like that balance that you described of finding that way that you can be creative but also support yourself? What would you say to that young person and advise them, I guess?
Sure.
Encourage them. What would you say?
Yeah, because I have it all figured out.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
you got it more figured out than you let on. But
so I think one of the things that there was this pressure that I had growing up, and some of it you could say was cultural, some of it was something I put on myself. And I think a lot of people, young people, we kind of put it on ourselves as we're getting out of high school. We're looking at what are we going to do with our life? Everybody, your senior year, that's the only question you get from an adult, right? Is, so where are you going to college? Are you going to school? What are you going to do next? And you're just freaking out, trying to imagine living anywhere other than your parents' house, figuring out how to cook, that kind of stuff. But I think that the most important thing that I would say to somebody at that place would be that journey of self-discovery, of figuring out what you're meant to do with your life, is a longer process than your senior year or something that you figure out in 4 years of college. And I think so many times there's this pressure that you have to figure out the rest of your life in 365 days or something like that. And that there's this whole journey, this process. We look at people in my generation, and the millennials statistically are likely to hold a lot of different career paths in their life, more than generations prior. Because sometimes it takes longer for people to figure out what they're meant to do with their lives than maybe we assume it does when we're 18 and kind of stressing about this and trying to figure it out. So I think that for a lot of people, college can be a really, really great option. For other people, maybe it's a technical school, but not being afraid, whatever you do to pursue your passion, either directly or in the midst of that, depending on your life situation. And, everybody's details are different, so there's not one rule to it. But not being afraid to recognize in yourself, kind of like what I did with creativity, that there's this deep part of me that needs this thing, that just lives and breathes this thing. And it has to be a part of me. I have to prioritize it because it's part of who I am. That way I feel like that's part of what I'm uniquely meant to do in the world. And whatever I do, I can't give up on that, and that's where it looks different for different people and how they choose to break it down from there. But I think that being able to listen to yourself in that way and listen to the voices of the people around you that can point out to you, hey, you're really good at this thing, because that was really, really important for me. I had a lot of people that came alongside me in high school and were like, you need to take music seriously because this is, something that you can do in a unique way. And yeah, I think that's probably what I would say, is just don't be afraid to do that seeking, and don't expect to have it all figured out in the first couple years of that process, because it's a journey for everybody, and you have to be willing to take that journey. And I think I see so many people. I have friends that are maybe 10 years older than me that chose not to do that and chose to just kind of push down parts of themselves that me and other people in their lives, we can see this is like something really unique and special that they have to offer the world. And that, they chose, not to take that path. And there's always more opportunity in the future for that. But I think if at a young age, if you're coming out and kind of figuring out, what do I want to do with my life? And not being afraid to take seriously those things that make you uniquely you. And even if even if they don't seem practical in their infancy, that you can continue to pursue them and figure out ways to make them an important part of your life, and whatever that looks like for you personally.
Yeah. One of the purposes of this podcast is to engaging this young adult audience where they can follow Jesus into any number of career fields.
Yeah.
I feel like there's kind of like almost this stigma, like if you're really going to be a good Christian, you got to work at a church or like you got to be a pastor or a missionary or something. And it's so much so not the case. But I mean, I know that you work in a church and you work with churches, but the space that you work in is so much broader than that. And I see that almost when I graduated high school, it was almost it was like a negative thing if somebody said, I'm just going to take a year off to try and figure things out. And I feel like that's being more and more accepted now, which is a good thing, because I can tell you this: I have an undergrad that is not in the career I'm in. I was sitting in my bed. I was 19 years old. I was sitting in my bed in South Korea in the military, and I found Liberty University because I was a pretty new Christian, a couple years old Christian, and I knew they were a Christian university. So I go down the list looking at this stuff, and of course at that time I said, I'm definitely not going to be a pastor, so I don't want to do any of this divinity stuff. And so I'm looking down the list, what can I study, what can I study? And I landed on education. And man, I think that my passion for young people is what drew me to that. But there are so many things about education that are just not me.
Sure.
And in this role, sure, some of that stuff that I learned, especially the psychology and stuff like that, in those classes is helpful in my new role. But man, it's a good thing the military paid for most of that degree, because it would have been, a hard loss to pay for all that and then come out and completely shift. And I'm not alone in that. I see a lot of people my age that have spent all of this money on college, or in their junior year decide that's no longer what they want to do in college. And so I think there's some benefit to that, to taking that year and taking that time to figure it out. My wife, for example, is the opposite. She knew she was going to be a nurse. Probably she was like 8 or 9 years old. And I think that happens. I think that happens to people, and there's just confirmation along the way. But for me and for a lot of other people, it takes a longer process to figure out what that actually looks like and who you're actually going to want to become. And so I think that I'm not encouraging everybody to take a gap year. But man,
well, that
could be.
That comes down, like you said, too, like some of that is that self-awareness, that understanding. Some people just know what they want to do, and they just know, and everyone around them confirms it. And then it's like, why wait? But I started the 4-year degree right out of high school, and I would have been disappointed with myself. Not with myself. I would have been disappointed coming out of those 4 years, studying what I had studied with the person I am today. And that's not at all a rallying cry against college or anything like that. Because at this point, I'd go back for fun to study things I want to study. I love college. But it's a different journey for different people, and kind of figuring out what's right for them. And you shouldn't be afraid to take that journey.
What was that program that you initially entered into?
It was music. I was a guitar performance major. So I was mainly studying classical guitar and like a very sort of rigid performance space. I could, come out with that and do probably teaching, and I could teach guitar lessons, that sort of thing, perform stuff that I do and love, but didn't end up being my focus 4 years later in life, or what's my primary passion,
Yeah.
So
you could probably figure out teaching guitar.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Well, I spent that whole semester in meetings with academic advisors. Like, so what do I do with this degree? And they're like, you can freelance. I'm like, I can freelance for free. And I left.
Oh man, that is funny. You would be like this guy I see out on Main Street. He has like a guitar lessons with
Yeah.
whoever, and just put a phone number on the thing. But and for those of you that don't know, Noah actually created do we call it a riff? What do we call that intro?
Theme song.
Theme song, yeah. So Noah actually created the theme song to this podcast, and I told him the guidance I gave him was, I think I said I want some smooth, funky jazz.
Yeah.
I don't really know how that even
and a rock and roll riff.
And a rock and roll riff, yeah. So
it was like 6 genres all rolled into one sentence.
So basically, the indie pop thing, you did it and brought it all together.
Yeah.
So, but
that's what I love. It's the puzzle pieces. It's like my favorite projects are always when a client will bring me this idea, and I just go into it like I have no idea how to give you that. And those are always the most fun projects because you just have to experiment, and just somewhere along the way the magic happens.
I love how you describe it as a puzzle piece.
Yeah.
Because as a follower of Jesus, we all basically have the same purpose.
Yeah.
Love God, love people. Jesus told us those are the two most important things. And so how we do it might be a little bit different, but that's our same, that's the same goal for all of us.
Yeah.
And then working in the roles that I work in, you come into a church and the culture's different, the people are different, where they're at in their spiritual journeys is different. Also, where I'm at in my spiritual journey is different. And so you come in and you try to like juggle those things around and figure out like, okay, what is the best way to accomplish this goal? And so it's like putting all those puzzle pieces together, and that's one of that's one of the reasons I'm really excited to be here, because Encounter loves just trying things.
Yeah.
I came in, half of my interviews were basically like brainstorming sessions about what we were going to do in youth ministry coming in, because the reality is, and I shared this a couple of weeks ago with the church, but the reality is, for like 50 years or more, youth ministries looked very, very much like it does today. And we've only increased the number of young people that are leaving the church.
Yeah.
And so, one of my personal goals, sorry about that, you guys. One of my personal goals is to help these young people to figure out what it is that they're gifted in, that they're supposed to be doing, and how to walk in that. Now we've graduated kids this year, that are studying molecular biology. I have no idea what that even is.
Me either.
It's way over my head. And I realize that there are things beyond what I'm capable of doing that these kids are going to do. But I find it that my purpose is to help them to walk in who it is that they are. And you mentioned it, growing up, you had a lot of those people in your life that spoke into your life and gave you encouragement and confidence in what it is that you're doing. Could you imagine going through your life, same giftings, same ability, but no encouragement? How do you think that would have turned out?
Not good. So much of that confirmation of other people, especially in creative fields, but I don't even know if it's especially in creative fields. Anything where what you're doing affects other people around you, having those people around you say, hey, I was affected by this in a positive way, is, I think, the fuel that drives almost anybody to do what they do at the end of the day. That's definitely true for me as an artist, as a musician, and especially in the production side of things. I see my role in the music industry as I'm like the bridge point between an artist and their artistic process and their art and the fans. And you have to have that person in the middle that just gets the music to them, that helps finish the record and does all this work. And getting to see that process of, somebody else, having some measure of success in that, that they write a song and it's really important to them, and I help them finish the song. It goes to their fans and it becomes something really important to those fans that changes somebody's life in a positive way. And that's the kind of fuel I think you need as a person to do what you need to do, what you do, or to sense that that's important. I don't know if maybe you've had that experience in ministry.
For sure. I've had, I remember my first conversation with a pastor when I was expressing interest in going into ministry, and they tried to talk me out of it. which is, and I felt the same way. I felt dejected at first, but I'm grateful for that conversation, because I think it helped me to realize that this is the only thing. It's almost like that. It's almost like that. If I can do anything else, then I'm going to go do it. And so having that conversation really made me second guess myself a little bit, made me search inside. But I will say that if that was the only conversation I had, I don't think I'd be sitting here with you today. But when I had some conversations with some other people, one of those guys being my former youth pastor, he's like, I knew it. You know, it's kind of like, it's kind of crazy, and maybe that's just something people say, but it's like, you mean you knew this when I was 17 and I didn't know who Jesus was. I didn't know any of this stuff. I read 5 pages of the Bible a night because I thought it made me a good person.
Right.
And, that's that, but those people speaking into my life and, made a major difference in who I am. I would not have felt the freedom, because let's be honest, Noah, I'm not in this for the money.
Sure.
I wouldn't have felt the freedom to do that, because, all of America tells you, go make that bag, go get what's yours, and that kind of stuff. Right. And so it's like, those things are fine and good if that's what you're supposed to be doing. But for me, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, working with young people and helping them to find out what is their thing. And so I definitely can resonate with that experience in my own life, without a doubt. But I have and this will just kind of be a fun question for you. If you had money wasn't an option, just like, I don't know, like, I have no idea. Like, just Bill Gates was just like depositing stuff. I don't know. Or maybe we shouldn't. Maybe that Bill Gates is too divisive. I don't know. Somebody rich is just depositing money into your bank account every week, unlimited amount. You can just say, I need this much, whatever. What would you do to change the world, to make the world a better place? What would Noah Althoff do?
Wow. So I'm a musician, and the concept of unlimited money is like the antithesis of my existence. So, I mean, besides the obvious things that you would like, ending poverty and hunger and basic medical care for everybody, I feel like you have to say that, right? That's
probably.
But besides that. And I'm gonna get theological with this again, but I'm reading this other guy again on my big pile of books, Scott McKnight. I don't know if you've ever read him; he's great.
I've heard the name,
this book called Blue Parakeet, which is about how to read the Bible. It's really interesting, but he has this concept in it where he says that the result of the primary consequence of sin, and allowing chaos and death and violence and brokenness into the world, is a loss of oneness. That there's this unity that we're created for, again, is being in the image of God and in the image of the relational love, which is what God is in the Trinity, and that we're meant to exist in this perpetual state of oneness or unity with ourselves, each other, creation, and God. And that what the fall disrupts is that pattern of oneness and unity, and it creates all of this divisiveness between us. And I think that if I had unlimited resources, I would probably focus that on whatever would encourage restoring some sense of oneness in a really divisive world. For me, just because of where my interests and giftings and leanings lie, that would probably involve some kind of support of artists or writers or speakers that would be able to put in the forefront this, culturally, this idea that we can coexist in diversity without divisiveness. Whether that probably some kind of putting people on platform that would be willing to have conversations that are radically different people. And we're just kind of break down this notion that we have culturally of putting people in boxes, based on our ideologies. That's probably a deep answer, but
Yeah.
that's probably what I would do. Something that would restore that would just be a small piece of perspective shifting in a world that is as divisive as it is.
Mm-hmm. That thought made me just think of this conference I went to several years ago. It was probably 2017, 2018. And racial tensions have existed for a while. It seems like they've only gotten worse.
Yeah.
So this was it was less divisive than it is now, but it was still a divisive topic. And Lee, I can't remember his last name, but he ran for I believe he ran for governor or mayor of a certain area in Georgia, where it was like 90% white, and Lee was an African American, and so he and Reggie Joyner, who's a white guy, creator of Orange, they sat down and they had a conversation together, and that it was kind of like. It was like one of those things. It was like the last session before lunch or before dinner or something. Yeah. So a lot of people had left, but that session in and of itself was worth being there for the entire conference. That was the conversation, because at the beginning it was just those two, but at the end, like 3 or 4 more people joined the conversation from radically different backgrounds. Yeah. And just hearing different points of view is something that we don't do near enough. We have our own upbringing and we have our own mindset that through which we understand the world, our worldview, but rarely do we seek to understand someone else's. And man, if we I think a lot of these divisions would cease to exist if we just really understood where this other person's coming from. Yeah. It's not that they're crazy, and it's not that we're crazy. It's the fact that we were raised and we witnessed, very different societies growing up, and if we just took the time to listen. So I think that's cool. I wish I had an unlimited amount of money to give you, and we could start figuring out what that looks like. But man, it is. That is something that is definitely needed in our culture. I mean, Jesus told us this is a church. We were supposed to be one as he and his Father are one. And I think that even goes beyond just the church. We should be people that others can look to in times of need, right? I mean, regardless of their faith or anything like that. I mean, that's what Jesus did. He sought out those people in their times of need. So,
when you look at the whole ministry of Jesus in the early church too, it's so much a integral piece of our faith that we do that work of bringing people together of every tribe and nation and tongue, and this. I've been studying a lot of the early church too, as I'm kind of getting into history and all that. And you look at to our best knowledge, who would have attended, an early church, a house church meeting in 100 AD? And they say, well, it would have been, people of all these different, ethnicities, social classes, everyone from rulers to homeless people to, Jews, Gentiles, all coming together under unity, finding that oneness, in relationship with one another and ultimately with Christ. And the more that we can prioritize and perpetuate that as the church, I think we'll do so much good too. I think that's something in a lot of ways we've failed to do, and we need to take more seriously.
It's interesting. Another book I've been reading lately. Actually, I listened to this one because that's the stage of life I'm at with 2 young kids.
I do a lot of audiobooks too. I drive a lot.
Yeah, I listen to those. Listen to those books is a little bit easier than reading nowadays. And so it's Bruxy Cavey, and he's a BIC guy.
Yeah, I love him.
The End of Religion. And so it's this idea that Jesus came basically to subvert religion. Yeah. And if you look at the church, and man, I've been reading some articles lately, like how would it, in 40 years and 50 years when I don't even know what generation we're talking about now anymore, but when the next generation is like the ones who are completely running the church, does church even look like what it does today. And that's a very interesting thing that would get a lot of people, kind of make a lot of people a little bit nervous. But Bruxy talks about this idea that Jesus came to basically break down those religious barriers that existed. And when you talk about that oneness that exists, there's, their unifying factor was Jesus. There wasn't this, well, you have to dress this way, or you have to look this way, or talk that way, or anything like that.
It wasn't even a building.
Right. It wasn't even a building.
It was an idea.
It was right. Yeah. It was this idea. And so, like, the first miracle Jesus, this is how he starts his book, the first miracle Jesus ever performed. And, everybody's like, yeah, Jesus turned water into wine. Woohoo, we can drink and all this stuff. But no, he turned water into wine, and he used these basins that were for sacred washing, and it was a ritualistic thing that he did, and you can gloss over it and miss it so easily. But so many of the things that Jesus did, and I wonder, what if Jesus came today, and what kind of things would he seek to break down in our churches? Like, would he come and on Super Bowl Sunday when we're all wearing our jerseys and, like, I don't know, just rip, like, do figuratively what he did with the tables in the temple, or so much more than that. Even, like, would he, who would he associate with? What kind of things that we do every single day would Jesus break down to more effectively create this oneness? And I think that while we're not Jesus, that should be part of our mission, and our goal is to seek to break some of those things down.
And to perpetually ask that question, too.
Right.
What attachments are we clinging to that are not of, Christ, but these man-made formations?
Right. I've always been a fan, a believer that Christians, we should be some of the people that change our minds the most often. Yeah. And I don't mean like changing doctrine, but like changing our minds in that I can see how when I acted 3 years ago was not Christ honoring, even though I thought it was at the time. And not that I'm going to go, necessarily that I need to go back and apologize to every single person I interacted with over those 3 years, although maybe I do. But like always moving forward towards that ultimate goal of becoming more like Jesus. And I think that should be our ultimate goal. But that's just one guy's opinion.
I'm with you, though.
So it's two guys' opinion.
Humility and empathy. I think if we all had a little bit more of that, it would be a lot more.
And we're preaching to the choir. So I mean, we're talking to ourselves too. I know there's a lot of things that exist in my own life that Jesus would be like, dude, why are you sitting here watching like Shark Tank for the 1500th night in a row? Like, do something with your life. But so Noah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. And
this has been great.
If you, we'll probably have you back on sometime in the future, because this has been, I feel like we could go for hours and hours on this. But if in the meantime, if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, whether they're trying to work on some indie pop music or they just have a question, or they're just like, hey, I like this dude's hair and I want to know like how to get it going without, it being too awkward. But anyway, that's
just part of the process. I learned that the hard way.
I know.
You just have to look stupid for a couple months. or forever, if you may. Hair didn't fix the problem. But
how would they get into contact with you? What would be the way to do that?
Yeah, so if you're interested in doing any kind of indie pop work with me, working on a record, production, mixing, songwriting, any of that, if you can go to my website, which is just www.noaltoff.com. That's ALTHOFF. And I'm on Instagram sometimes. I'm not great at social media, but if you want to shoot me a message and talk about theology, I should remember my Instagram. I think it's just Noah Altoff Music.
And if we'll check that, and if not, we'll throw it in the show notes. But man, that's awesome. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hopefully there's something that can be gained about from our babbling, and
There's
and ranting.
something valuable in there in the middle.
Yeah, somewhere probably about like 27 minutes.
Yeah,
that's probably where you want to.
It's kind of how I watch most of these. You got that little plus 30 second button. You just keep tapping it till it gets good.
Yeah, skip the ads.
Somewhere in the middle.
You got to skip the ads, But thanks, Noah.
Yeah, thanks.